I won't let you take her." The words tore through Black Hollow's church like thunder. Every head turned toward the woman they'd spent months mocking, the fat drifter in the too-tight wedding dress. But Marin Holloway wasn't running anymore. Not from the debts, not from the past, not from the man who'd come to collect her like property. Because behind her stood a little girl who'd called her Mama. And for the first time in her brutal life, Marin had something worth fighting for. If you want to see how far a woman can go when she finally stops running, stay until the end. Drop a like and comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Chapter 1. The Wedding. The February wind cut through Black Hollow like a butcher's blade, carrying with it the smell of pine sap and wood smoke. Marin Holloway stood in the back room of the church, staring at herself in a mirror so scratched and weathered she could barely make out her reflection. Maybe that was a mercy. The dress didn't fit. It had never been meant to fit. The white fabric, yellowed now, stained by years folded in a canvas pack, strained across her shoulders and pulled tight across her stomach. She'd tried letting out the seams the night before, her fingers clumsy with the needle, but there was only so much fabric to work with. The result made her look like a sausage stuffed into casing, about to burst. This is what you get for being a romantic fool, she thought bitterly. The dress had been her mother's once, back when Marin was a child in Missouri, before the cholera, before the debts, before everything fell apart. Her mother had been slender as a willow branch. Marin had inherited her father's build instead, broad-shouldered, thick-waisted, made for hard work rather than delicate things. "Miss Holloway?" A timid voice came from beyond the door. They're ready for you," and Marin closed her eyes and pressed one hand against her stomach, trying to steady her breathing. Through the thin walls, she could hear the murmur of the congregation. 50 people, maybe 60. The entire population of Black Hollow and the surrounding ranches, all gathered to witness what would surely become the year's favorite joke. The fat woman marrying the Ice King. That's what they'd been calling it for the past 2 weeks, ever since Elias Boone had posted the marriage announcement outside Pritchard's general store. Marin had heard the whispers in the street, seen the looks. The women covered their mouths and giggled. The men shook their heads in disbelief or pity. She couldn't tell which was worse. Elias Boone, the coldest man in Montana Territory, they said. A rancher whose wife had died 3 years ago, bringing forth their second child. A son who'd lived only 3 days. Elias had buried them both on a hill overlooking his land, and something in him had frozen solid that winter. He spoke only when necessary. He never smiled. He worked his ranch with mechanical efficiency, raising his daughter Ivy alone, hiring and firing a succession of housekeepers who couldn't tolerate his silence or the isolation. And now he was marrying Marin. Not for love, not even for companionship. He needed someone to manage his house and help raise his daughter, and Marin needed food, shelter, and safety from a past that was always one step behind her. It was a transaction, nothing more. But at least it's honest, Marin told herself. At least he's not pretending. She took one last look in the mirror, then turned away before she could lose her nerve. The dress would have to do. Everything would have to do. She was 31 years old, with no money, no family, and nowhere else to go. This marriage was her last chance at something resembling a normal life. The church's main door creaked as she pushed it open. The sound of conversation died instantly. Marin stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame, and looked out at the sea of faces. The church was small, just a rough wooden structure with benches on either side of a central aisle. But it felt enormous. Every eye was on her. She saw Mrs. Pritchard elbow her daughter and whisper something behind her hand. She saw Harold Weeks, the saloon owner, smirk and shake his head. She saw the Calloway brothers in the back row, barely containing their laughter. Her face burned. Her throat tightened. For one wild moment, she considered running, just turning and fleeing out the back door, into the woods, disappearing the way she'd disappeared before. But then she saw Ivy. The little girl sat in the front row, wearing a blue dress that was slightly too small for her. She was 7 years old, with dark hair like her father's and eyes that were too old for her face. Those eyes had seen too much grief already, but right now they were shining. Ivy was smiling at her. A real smile. Bright and genuine and full of something Marin hadn't seen directed at her in years. Hope. Marin's feet moved before she could think. She walked down the aisle slowly, keeping her eyes on Ivy, blocking out everything else. The whispers rose around her like flies. Must be desperate. Poor man. That dress, did you see? Wonder how long before he... Marin's hands trembled. She clasped them together, squeezing hard enough that her knuckles went white. Just a few more steps. Just a little further. Elias stood at the altar beside Reverend Fletcher. He wore a clean black suit that looked like it had been purchased for his first wedding and hadn't been worn since. His face was expressionless. Not cruel, not kind, just blank. He was 42, tall and rangy, with dark hair going gray at the temples and deep lines carved around his mouth. He didn't look at Marin as she approached. His gaze was fixed somewhere above her head, at the back wall of the church. He can't even look at me, Marin thought. He can't even pretend for one day. She stopped beside him. Reverend Fletcher cleared his throat and opened his Bible. He was a thin, nervous man who'd arrived in Black Hollow only 6 months ago and still seemed perpetually startled by the brutality of frontier life. Dearly beloved, he began, his voice wavering slightly, we are gathered here today. Wait! Everyone turned. Ivy had stood up from her seat, her small face fierce with determination. Before anyone could stop her, she walked right up to Marin and took her hand. Ivy, Elias said quietly, sit down. No. Ivy's voice was small but firm. She looked up at Marin, then turned to face the congregation. Everyone's being mean. I can hear you whispering. You think she can't hear you, but she can. A flush of embarrassment rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Pritchard looked affronted. Harold Weeks suddenly became very interested in his boots. Ivy, Elias started again. She's beautiful, Ivy said, louder now, her voice ringing through the small church. You're all just too mean to see it. She helped me find my lost doll last week. She taught me how to make cornbread. She tells me stories before bed. She's going to be my mama, and I think she's beautiful. Silence. Marin's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. Beside her, she felt rather than saw Elias stiffen. His hand moved slightly, as if he wanted to reach for his daughter but didn't know how. Ivy squeezed Marin's hand. That's my mama, she said firmly. Then she returned to her seat, her back straight, daring anyone to argue. No one did. Reverend Fletcher cleared his throat again. Well, yes. As I was saying, dearly beloved. The ceremony proceeded in a blur. Marin heard herself make the appropriate responses. She felt Elias's hand, calloused, rough, impersonal, as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. The ring was too large. It had probably belonged to his first wife. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Fletcher said, sounding relieved to be done with it. You may kiss the bride. Elias turned to her for the first time. His gray eyes met hers, and for just a moment she thought she saw something flicker there. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the shadow of an apology. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead quickly, formally, the way you might kiss a maiden aunt. It's done, he said quietly. And it was. That's Chapter 2. The Ranch. The Boone Ranch sat at the base of the Bitterroot Mountains, 2 hours by wagon from Black Hollow. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. All dark pine forests and gray stone with snow-capped peaks rising behind it like the walls of a prison. The house itself was larger than Marin had expected. 2 stories of weathered timber, with a wide porch and real glass windows that probably cost more than most people in the territory earned in a year. But it felt empty. I'll show you around, Elias said as he helped her down from the wagon. His voice was flat, businesslike. Ivy, take Marin's bags to the spare room upstairs, the one next to yours. Not his room then, Marin noted. Of course not. Ivy grabbed the canvas pack that held everything Marin owned and dragged it toward the house with determination. Elias led Marin inside, pointing out rooms with the enthusiasm of someone cataloging supplies. Kitchen, parlor, my office, don't go in there, pantry, root cellar door, stairs to the bedrooms. Everything was clean but lifeless. No pictures on the walls. No curtains at the windows. No flowers, no decorations. Nothing to suggest anyone actually lived here, rather than just survived here. I need you to handle the cooking and cleaning, Elias continued, still not quite looking at her. Ivy needs help with her reading and arithmetic. I'll handle the ranch work, cattle, fences, that sort of thing. You stay in the house. I don't want you out with the livestock or near the equipment. It's dangerous." "And you don't think I can handle it?" Marin translated silently. "When winter comes, you'll need to help preserve food," he went on. "There's a smokehouse out back. Last housekeeper didn't know the first thing about salting meat, and we nearly starved come March. Can you cook?" "Some," Marin said carefully, which was technically true. She could cook. Whether anyone would want to eat what she cooked was another matter. Elias nodded. "Good enough. Ivy will show you where things are. I've got to check the fence line before dark." He turned and walked out without another word, leaving Marin standing alone in the kitchen. She stood there for a long moment, listening to his boots on the porch steps, then the sound of him riding away. The house settled around her with small creaks and sighs. Somewhere upstairs she could hear Ivy moving around. "This is your home now," she told herself. "Make the best of it." But the walls felt like they were closing in. The first meal Marin cooked was a disaster. She'd found flour, lard, and some dried beef in the pantry, and decided to attempt biscuits and gravy, simple frontier fare that even she should be able to manage. But the flour was older than she'd realized. The lard had an odd smell, and she miscalculated the amount of water needed. The biscuits came out of the oven hard as stones, and the gravy had the consistency of library paste. Elias stared at his plate without expression. Ivy poked at a biscuit with her fork, then looked up at Marin with wide, diplomatic eyes. "It's very filling?" "It's inedible," Elias said flatly. He pushed his plate away. "Tomorrow morning, Ivy will show you where I keep the good flour. The stuff you used has been sitting since before Emma died. Should have thrown it out." He stood. "I'll make some eggs." Marin's face burned. "I can... No." He was already moving toward the stove. "Just watch. Pay attention." She stood there, humiliated, as he efficiently cracked eggs into a pan and scrambled them with a splash of milk and a pinch of salt. His movements were economical, precise. He'd clearly been cooking for himself and Ivy for years. He divided the eggs onto 3 plates and sat back down. "Eat," he told Ivy. The eggs were good. Of course they were. Marin ate in silence, each bite tasting like shame. After dinner, Elias went to his office and closed the door. Marin could hear him moving around in there, the scratch of a pen on paper, the soft thud of a ledger being closed. She cleaned up the kitchen, washing the dishes while Ivy sat at the table, ostensibly doing her arithmetic, but mostly just drawing pictures of horses in the margins of her slate. "Don't feel bad," Ivy said after a while. "Papa's good at cooking. He's good at lots of things." "I noticed," Marin said, scrubbing a plate harder than necessary. "He wasn't always like this," Ivy continued. She kept her eyes on her slate, her voice carefully casual. "Before Mama died, he used to laugh. He used to pick me up and spin me around. He used to sing while he worked." Marin turned to look at her. "What happened to your mama, Ivy?" Ivy's hand stilled on her slate. "She got sick when she was having the baby. The baby was turned wrong," Mrs. Pritchard said. "They both died." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her chalk. "Papa hasn't sung since." "I'm sorry," Marin said softly. "It's okay." Ivy looked up, and there was that too-old expression in her eyes again. "You're here now. Maybe things will get better." Chapter 3. Learning the Land. Things did not immediately get better. Over the next few weeks, Marin discovered just how unprepared she was for frontier ranch life. The wilderness she'd traveled through for years had taught her how to survive in the open, how to find clean water, which plants were edible, how to start a fire in the rain. But running a homestead was different. It required skills she'd never learned. She ruined a batch of laundry by using water that was too hot, shrinking Elias's good shirts until they looked like they'd been made for a child. She forgot to check the bread dough rising by the stove and came back to find it had overflowed the bowl and dripped onto the floor. She tried to churn butter and somehow ended up with a lumpy, bitter mess that even the chickens wouldn't eat. Elias never yelled. That would have required emotion. Instead, he simply corrected her in that same flat, detached voice. "The washing water needs to be warm, not boiling. You have to punch down bread dough after the first rise. Butter takes patience. You can't rush it." Each correction felt like a small cut, death by 1,000 paper slices. But the worst part wasn't Elias's criticism. It was the town. Every week, Marin and Ivy took the wagon into Black Hollow for supplies. And every week, Marin had to endure the stares, the whispers, the barely concealed mockery. Mrs. Pritchard would purse her lips and sigh dramatically when Marin asked for sugar. Harold Weeks would make loud comments to his friends about Boone's charity case. The other ranch wives would stop their conversations when Marin approached, then resume talking in pointed whispers as soon as she passed. "Don't listen to them," Ivy would say fiercely, holding Marin's hand as they walked. "They're just mean old biddies." "Ivy, you shouldn't say—" "It's true, though." Ivy's small jaw set stubbornly. "Mama, Emma, used to say Mrs. Pritchard had a face like a constipated mule. Papa laughed so hard he choked on his coffee." Despite everything, Marin smiled. "I bet he did." But the whispers still hurt. And at night, lying alone in her small room, listening to the wind howl through the pine trees, Marin wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The breakthrough came in April during a late spring storm. Marin was in the kitchen attempting to make stew when she heard Ivy scream. She ran to the parlor and found the little girl pressed against the window, pointing outside with a shaking hand. "Papa! Papa fell!" Marin's heart lurched. Through the rain-lashed window, she could see a figure on the ground near the barn. Elias. She didn't think. She just ran. The rain hit her like a physical blow, soaking through her dress in seconds. The yard had turned to mud that sucked at her boots. She reached Elias and dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over him, unsure where to touch. "Elias! Elias, can you hear me?" He groaned, his eyes opened, unfocused. "Horse, spooked, threw me. Don't move." Marin looked around wildly. They were 50 yards from the house. He was a tall man, solid muscle, and she was strong from years of hard travel, but could she move him? She had to try. "I'm going to get you inside," she said. "You can't—" "Shut up." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "Just shut up and let me help you." She got her arms under his shoulders and heaved. He was heavy. Saints above, he was heavy. But Marin had hauled water buckets and firewood and her own body weight up mountain trails. She had survived 3 years alone in the wilderness. She could damn well move one stubborn rancher. Inch by inch, she dragged him toward the house. Mud coated them both. Rain poured down. Her back screamed in protest. But she kept moving, kept pulling, her breath coming in harsh gasps. Ivy had opened the door and was standing there, her face white. "Mama, is he—" "He's fine. Get blankets and start a fire." Between them, they got Elias inside and onto the parlor couch. Marin's hand shook as she checked him over. No blood, no obvious breaks. But he'd hit his head, and there was a growing lump above his left temple. "Concussion," she muttered. She'd seen them before, traveling with wagon trains. "You need to stay awake. Ivy, talk to your father. Don't let him fall asleep." "What are you doing?" Elias asked, his voice slurred slightly. "Making a compress." Marin was already moving, her training from the trail coming back. She grabbed clean cloth, cold water, a pinch of dried herbs she'd noticed in the pantry. Old ones, probably left from Emma's time, but they might still work. She crushed them, mixed them with the water, soaked the cloth. "Where did you learn that?" Elias asked as she pressed the compress to his head. "Trail medicine. You pick things up." She met his eyes. "You're going to be fine, but you need to rest." "Can't. The cattle can wait." Her voice was firm. "You nearly cracked your skull open. One day won't kill the ranch." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. March. Chapter 4. The Thaw. After the accident, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. Elias didn't suddenly become warm or affectionate. But the wall between them developed a few cracks. He started leaving notes in the morning before he went out to work. Forgot to mention, root cellar door sticks. Have to lift and pull at the same time. Or good job with the biscuits yesterday. Almost edible. That last one made Marin laugh out loud. She found her rhythm in the house. She learned which pan to use for which purpose, how to judge when the oven was the right temperature, how to keep the stove fed throughout the day. Her cooking improved from terrible to merely mediocre, which felt like a significant victory. But her real domain became the garden. Behind the house, there was a plot of land that had once been cultivated but had gone to weeds after Emma died. Marin stared at it one morning and saw potential. She'd grown up on a farm before everything fell apart. She knew plants. "Can I use this?" she asked Elias. He glanced at it, shrugged. "If you want. Emma used to grow vegetables there. Haven't had time to keep it up." Marin spent a week clearing the weeds, turning the soil, planning what to plant. Ivy helped, her small hands eager to dig in the dirt. And slowly, the garden came back to life. Lettuce, carrots, beans, peas. Marin had saved seeds from her traveling years, kept them wrapped in oilcloth in the bottom of her pack. Now she planted them, each one a small act of hope. The garden became her refuge. When the house felt too confining, when Elias's silence became too heavy, she would go outside and work with her hands in the soil. Ivy would often join her, chattering about everything and nothing, her lessons, the horses, things she remembered about her mother. "Mama Emma used to make me flower crowns," Ivy said one afternoon, weaving grass stems together, "from the dandelions by the creek." "That sounds lovely," Marin said, pulling weeds. "Can you make one?" Marin's hands stilled. I don't know how." "I'll show you." Ivy jumped up and ran to where dandelions grew wild near the fence line. She came back with a handful of the yellow flowers and sat down beside Marin. "You split the stem like this, then you feed the next one through." They spent the rest of the afternoon making flower crowns, Ivy's small fingers patient as she taught Marin the technique her mother had taught her. When they were done, Ivy placed one on Marin's head, her face serious. "There," she said. "Now you're a proper mama." Marin's throat tightened. "Ivy, Papa." Ivy turned as Elias approached from the barn. "Look, we made crowns." Elias stopped at the edge of the garden, his hat in his hands. He looked at Marin, really looked at her, maybe for the first time since the wedding. She sat there in her mud-stained dress, her hair falling out of its pins, wearing a crown of dandelions, and she felt suddenly, acutely embarrassed. But Elias didn't laugh. His expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. "It suits you," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked back to the barn, leaving Marin sitting there, her heart doing something strange and uncomfortable in her chest. Chapter 5. Secrets in the Night. As spring turned to early summer, the ranch found a rhythm. Marin still burned dinner occasionally, and Elias still disappeared into his silence, but they were learning to exist around each other. More importantly, Ivy was flourishing. The little girl followed Marin everywhere, soaking up attention like a desert flower after rain. Marin taught her how to identify healing plants, willow bark for pain, yarrow for wounds, chamomile for stomach troubles. She showed her how to read the sky for coming weather, how to find north without a compass, how to move quietly through the forest without disturbing the animals. "How do you know all this?" Ivy asked one afternoon as they knelt by the creek looking for watercress. "I learned it traveling," Marin said. "When you're alone in the wilderness, you have to know these things. They keep you alive." "Were you alone for a long time?" Marin hesitated. "Yes, a few years." "Why?" "Because I was running," Marin thought. "Because I had no choice." But she couldn't tell Ivy that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Sometimes people need to be alone for a while," she said instead, "to figure things out." Ivy seemed to accept this. She pointed to a cluster of small white flowers growing near the water. "What are those?" "Bloodroot. Be careful. They're poisonous if you eat them, but the juice can be used for dye." Marin smiled. "Your Mama Emma might have used them for coloring fabric." "I don't remember her very well," Ivy said softly. "Just bits and pieces. Her voice, her hair, the way she smelled like lavender." She looked up at Marin. "Is that bad? That I'm forgetting?" "No, honey, that's not bad." Marin touched Ivy's hair gently. "People we love stay with us in different ways. The memories might fade, but the love doesn't." Ivy leaned against her. "I'm glad Papa married you, even if you can't cook very well yet." Marin laughed. "Thanks for that." They stayed by the creek until the sun started to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and gold. When they returned to the house, Elias was waiting on the porch, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. You were gone a long time, he said. We were exploring, Ivy announced. Marin showed me how to find watercress, and we saw a deer. A deer. Elias's eyes shifted to Marin. You took her into the woods? Just to the creek, Marin said, sensing the tension in him. We weren't far. The woods aren't safe. There are bears, cougars. You don't know this land yet. I was careful. Careful isn't enough. His voice was sharp now, real emotion finally cracking through. Ivy is my daughter, my responsibility. When you take her somewhere, I need to know where and for how long. Ivy's face crumpled. Papa, we were just inside Ivy. Now. The little girl looked between them, then fled into the house, her footsteps loud on the stairs. Marin faced Elias, her own anger rising. I would never put her in danger. You don't get to make that decision alone. He stepped closer, and she could see the fear behind his anger. I've already lost one family. I won't lose another. The words hung in the air between them. I'm not trying to replace your wife, Marin said quietly. I know I never could, but Ivy needs more than just to be kept safe in this house. She needs to learn, to explore, to have some kind of childhood. She's 7 years old. She's had plenty of childhood. Has she? Or has she just had grief and silence and a father who's so afraid of losing her that he's suffocating her? Elias flinched as if she'd struck him. His jaw worked. For a moment she thought he might yell, might finally let out some of that frozen anger she could sense coiled inside him. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the barn. Marin stood alone on the porch, her heart pounding. Inside, she could hear Ivy crying softly in her room. She'd crossed a line, she knew it. This wasn't really her family, no matter what anyone called her. She was an employee, a convenience, a solution to a problem. But saints help her. It was starting to feel like more than that. Moshavs. Chapter 6. The Dress. That night, after Ivy had cried herself to sleep and the house was quiet, Marin sat in her room and unpacked the wedding dress from her trunk. She did this sometimes, late at night, when the loneliness became too heavy. She would take out the yellowed fabric and hold it, remembering what it represented. The dress had never been about marriage. It had been about survival, about hope, about a promise made to someone who was probably dead. Marin's younger sister, Clara, had been 15 when their father's gambling debts finally caught up with them. Marin was 22. They'd been living in a rough mining camp in Nevada territory, their father spending every cent he earned at the poker tables, leaving his daughters to fend for themselves. When he died, shot in a dispute over cards, the men he owed money to came for payment. They took everything, the tent, the supplies, even the clothes Marin and Clara wore. But one of them, a man named Rhett Mercer, had looked at young Clara with eyes that made Marin's skin crawl. The older one's too plain, he'd said, circling them like a wolf. But the little one's pretty, she'll do. No, Marin had stepped between them. I'll work. I'll pay off the debt. Just leave her alone. Rhett had laughed. You? What could you possibly do that's worth anything? Anything, everything, please. The other men had found this funny, but Rhett had considered it, his cold eyes calculating. Tell you what, he'd said, I'll give you 1 month to earn what your father owed. If you can't, the girl's mine. I'll sell her to a saloon in San Francisco. Pretty little thing like that'll fetch a good price. 1 month. $800. A fortune for a woman with no skills and no prospects. Marin had tried everything. She'd worked in the camp kitchen until her hands bled from the lye soap. She'd taken in washing. She'd even considered things she wouldn't let herself think about now. But it wasn't enough. After 3 weeks, she had barely $200. And Rhett was watching, always watching, waiting for her to fail. So Marin had run. She'd stolen her mother's old wedding dress from where it was stored with a neighbor, grabbed Clara in the middle of the night, and fled into the wilderness. For 2 months, they'd survived on nothing, eating roots and berries, sleeping under trees, moving constantly, always looking over their shoulders. When we're safe, Marin had promised Clara one night, as they huddled together for warmth, when we finally find a place where we belong, I'm going to wear Mama's dress. It'll be a symbol, a fresh start. Just you and me, Clara. Sisters forever. Clara had smiled. She was shivering, her lips blue from cold, but she'd smiled. Promise? Promise. But safety never came. They'd been separated during a storm in the mountains. One moment Clara was right behind her, the next she'd vanished into the rain and fog. Marin had searched for 3 days, screaming herself hoarse, checking every ravine and cave. She never found her. For months after, Marin had moved through the wilderness like a ghost, surviving but not living, always listening for Claire's voice, always hoping. She'd kept the dress, kept the promise, because letting go of it would mean letting go of hope. And now here she was, wearing it for a marriage she didn't want, to a man who barely tolerated her, in a life that felt like just another form of survival. Marin pressed the fabric to her face and allowed herself to cry silently, the way she'd learned to in the wilderness. No sound, just tears, because sound could give you away. She didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway until they stopped outside her door. "Marin?" Elias's voice, quiet and uncertain. She quickly shoved the dress back into the trunk and wiped her eyes. "Yes? May I come in?" She hesitated, then opened the door. Elias stood there in his shirt sleeves, his hair disheveled, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "For earlier. You were right. I have been suffocating Ivy. I've been so afraid of losing her that I forgot she needs to live, not just survive." Marin blinked. She hadn't expected this. "I shouldn't have said, 'Yes, you should have.'" He ran a hand through his hair. "Someone needed to. Emma used to tell me the same thing. Elias, she'd say, 'You can't protect people from life. You can only teach them how to handle it.'" His voice roughened. "I forgot that after she died." They stood in silence for a moment. "I saw you crying," Elias said finally. "Just now, through the door gap. I wasn't trying to spy, He trailed off, then tried again. "Are you unhappy here?" "No, Marin struggled to find the words. "It's not that. It's just... You miss someone." She looked up sharply. He was watching her with those gray eyes, and for once they weren't cold. They were understanding. "My sister," she admitted. "I lost her years ago. I don't know if she's alive or dead. I'm sorry." "It was my fault. I was supposed to protect her. I'm sure you did everything you could." Marin wanted to believe that. But late at night, in the dark, she still heard Clara's voice calling for her through the storm. Elias cleared his throat. "Tomorrow, why don't you and Ivy go back to the creek? I'll come with you. You can show me these healing plants you've been teaching her about." Marin's breath caught. "You don't have to." "I want to." He met her eyes. "I want to try to be better for Ivy. And," he hesitated, "and for you. You deserve more than a prison." He turned to go, then paused. "That dress," he said, "the wedding dress. It meant something to you, didn't it?" "Yes," Marin whispered. "Whatever it was, whatever you lost, I'm sorry. I know this marriage isn't what you hoped for. It isn't what either of us hoped for. But maybe we can make it bearable. Maybe we can make it good." He left before she could respond. Marin stood in her doorway, her heart beating too fast, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. The faint, fragile warmth of hope. Chapter 7. The Beginning of Summer. The next morning dawned bright and clear. True to his word, Elias went with them to the creek. He was awkward at first, clearly out of practice with anything resembling leisure. But Ivy was so delighted to have both her parents with her that her joy was infectious. She chattered nonstop, pointing out flowers and birds, inventing elaborate stories about the fish in the creek. "That one's the king," she declared, pointing at a large trout. "And those little ones are his army." "What are they fighting?" Elias asked, and Marin was startled to hear genuine curiosity in his voice. "The evil pike from the deep pool," Ivy said seriously. "He wants to steal all the good hiding spots." "Well, we can't have that." Elias crouched down beside his daughter. "Maybe we should help the king, build him a better fortification." Together, they began arranging stones in the shallow water, creating elaborate structures while Ivy directed them like a tiny general. Marin watched, her hands working automatically to gather the watercress they'd come for, but her attention was on the man and the little girl. She saw the way Elias's face softened when he looked at Ivy, the way he listened to her with complete attention, as if her made-up story about warring fish was the most important thing in the world. The way he smiled, actually smiled, when she declared their fortress complete. This was the man he'd been before, Marin realized. Before the grief. Before the walls. And he was trying to find his way back. "Marin," Ivy called, "come see, we made a castle." Marin joined them, kneeling in the cold creek water. The castle was a haphazard pile of rocks, but it was charming in its imperfection. "It's perfect," she said. Elias looked at her, and something passed between them, an understanding perhaps, a recognition that they were both trying, both learning, both fumbling toward something neither of them had names for yet. "Thank you," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "For this, for everything." Marin felt her face warm. "I haven't done anything." "You have." He held her gaze. "You brought her back to me, my daughter. I'd lost her, just like I'd lost Emma. Not physically, but—" He gestured helplessly. "I'd locked myself away and taken her with me. You opened the door." Before Marin could respond, Ivy splashed them both, shrieking with laughter. The moment broke, but it didn't disappear. It hung there between them, a promise of something more. They walked back to the ranch together as the sun climbed higher, Ivy skipping ahead, Elias and Marin following side by side. And for the first time since Marin had arrived at the Boone Ranch, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was home. But in the back of her mind, in the place where fear lived, a voice whispered a warning. You can't run forever. The past always catches up. She pushed the thought away. For now, in this moment, she was happy. And she would hold on to that for as long as she could. Because the storm was coming. She just didn't know it yet. Summer arrived in full force across the Montana Territory, bringing with it long days of work and the slow transformation of the Boone Ranch. The garden Marin had planted began to flourish, rows of green pushing up through the dark soil like small miracles. She spent her mornings there, her hands in the earth, while Ivy played nearby and Elias worked the far pastures with his cattle. The rhythm of ranch life settled over them like a well-worn blanket, predictable, comfortable, occasionally threadbare but warm enough. Marin's cooking improved from mediocre to actually edible, and she learned to read Elias's moods by the set of his shoulders when he came in from the fields. Tense meant trouble with the cattle. Relaxed meant a good day. Exhausted meant he'd worked himself too hard again, and she'd need to force him to sit down and eat a proper meal. They were becoming something. Not quite a family, not yet, but not strangers either. "Papa's smiling more," Ivy observed one afternoon as they hung laundry on the line behind the house. The sheets snapped and billowed in the mountain wind. "Did you notice?" Marin had noticed. She'd noticed a lot of things. The way Elias had started lingering after dinner instead of disappearing immediately into his office. The way he asked her opinion about things, small things at first, like whether to plant oats or barley in the north field. But it was still more than he'd done in the beginning. The way he'd fixed the loose board on her bedroom floor without being asked, and left wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table last week with no explanation. "Your father's a good man," Marin said, pinning up one of his shirts. "He just needed time to heal." "Do you like him?" Ivy's question was casual, but her eyes were sharp. "I mean, really like him? Not just because you have to?" Marin's hand stilled on the clothespin. Did she? She'd married him out of necessity, out of desperation. But somewhere between the burned dinners and the late-night conversations on the porch and the quiet moments watching him with Ivy, something had shifted. When he walked into a room now, her heart did a small, complicated dance. When his hand accidentally brushed hers, she felt heat spread up her arm. When he smiled, rare as lightning, she wanted to do whatever it took to make him smile again. "Yes," she said finally. "I think I do." Ivy grinned. "Good. Because he likes you too. I can tell." "How can you tell?" "He looks at you the way he used to look at Mama Emma, like you're the first thing he sees in the morning and the last thing he thinks about at night." Ivy said it with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old who believed she understood the mysteries of the adult world. "And he whistles now when he works. He hasn't whistled in 3 years." Marin felt something warm and terrifying unfold in her chest. Hope. The dangerous kind. The kind that made you forget to protect yourself. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Marin stood on the porch and watched Elias ride in from the north pasture. He He sat tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low, his movements easy and confident. This was his element, the land, the work, the wild spaces. He saw her watching and raised a hand in greeting. She waved back, feeling suddenly shy, like a girl instead of a 31-year-old woman who'd survived things that would have broken most people. "Good day," she called as he dismounted. "Good enough." He tied his horse to the rail and climbed the porch steps. Up close, she could see the dust on his clothes, the sweat stains on his collar, the lines of fatigue around his eyes. "Found a weak spot in the fence line. Took me most of the afternoon to fix it. You should have come back for lunch. Didn't want to lose the light." He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "Something smells good. Venison stew. Don't get too excited. I probably oversalted it." "I doubt that." He met her eyes, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "You're a better cook than you give yourself credit for, Marin." Before she could respond, Ivy burst through the door. "Papa, come see. I can read a whole page now without any help." "Can you?" Elias's face transformed, softening in that way it only did for his daughter. "Well, I'd better hear it then." He let Ivy drag him inside, but he glanced back at Marin as he went, and his eyes said things his mouth hadn't yet learned how to say. Marin stood on the porch a moment longer, her heart beating too fast, and wondered when exactly she'd gone from surviving to living. The answer came to her like a whisper on the wind. The day Ivy called her mama. The day Elias looked at her like she mattered. The day this place started feeling less like a prison and more like home. But the whisper came with a warning too, one she tried to ignore. Nothing good lasts. Not for women like you. Not for people with pasts that won't stay buried. She pushed the thought away and went inside to serve dinner, determined to hold on to this fragile happiness for as long as the world would let her. The storm was still weeks away. She didn't need to worry about it yet, except she did. Because some part of her, the part that had learned to survive by always looking over her shoulder, knew the storm was already brewing on the horizon. She just couldn't see it yet. But it was coming. It was always coming. The following Sunday, Elias announced they'd be going into town for church and supplies. Marin's stomach knotted immediately. She'd managed to avoid most trips to Black Hollow over the past few weeks, sending Elias and Ivy instead, making excuses about needing to tend the garden or preserve food or any of a dozen other tasks. The truth was simpler. She couldn't face the whispers, the stares, the barely concealed contempt. "I should stay here," she said, focusing very hard on scrubbing the breakfast dishes. "There's so much to do, and—" "Marin," Elias's voice was gentle but firm, "you can't hide forever." "I'm not hiding." "Yes, you are." He came to stand beside her at the wash basin. "And I understand why. But Ivy wants you there. She wants to show you off to her friends from the other ranches. And—" he hesitated, "I want you there too." Marin's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Why?" "Because you're my wife. Because people need to see that you belong with us. Because I'm tired of them treating you like some kind of joke." His jaw set in a way she'd come to recognize, the stubborn look that meant he'd made up his mind and wouldn't be budged. "You matter, Marin. It's time Black Hollow understood that." She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that it didn't matter what the town thought, that she'd survived worse than gossip and mockery. But the way he was looking at her, protective, determined, almost fierce, made something in her chest tighten with emotion she didn't have words for. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll go." His expression softened. "Thank you. But if Mrs. Pritchard makes one comment about my dress, I'm leaving. If Mrs. Pritchard makes one comment about your dress, I'll make one about her husband's drinking problem. Fair trade." Marin laughed despite herself. "You wouldn't. Try me." He was almost smiling, and she realized with a start that he was teasing her. Elias Boone, the Ice King of Montana Territory, was actually teasing her. The world really had turned upside down. They arrived in Black Hollow just before the church service was set to begin. The town looked the same as always. Rough wooden buildings clustered along a single main street, mountains looming behind them like the walls of a fortress. But today it felt different somehow. Or maybe Marin felt different. She walked between Elias and Ivy, her hand clasped in the little girl's, and tried to hold her head high. She'd worn her best dress, a simple gray cotton that actually fit her properly, and pinned her hair up carefully. She might not be beautiful, but she could at least look respectable. The whispers started before they even reached the church steps. Is that her? Nerve to show her face, then heard she can't even cook a decent meal. Marin's steps faltered. Elias immediately moved closer, his hand finding the small of her back. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable. She's mine. She's under my protection. Challenge her at your own risk. Mrs. Pritchard stood near the church entrance, flanked by her daughter Sarah and two other ranch wives. They watched Marin approach with the cold assessment of vultures circling a dying animal. Mrs. Boone, Mrs. Pritchard said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. What a surprise to see you in town. We thought perhaps you'd decided ranch life was too much for you. Not at all, Marin said, forcing her voice to stay level. I've been quite busy with the garden and the household. Oh, the garden. Yes. Mrs. Pritchard's smile sharpened. Sarah mentioned she saw your little plot when she visited the Hendersons' ranch. She said it was very rustic. Rustic was clearly code for something less charitable. Before Marin could respond, Elias stepped forward. The garden is thriving, Mrs. Pritchard. We'll have enough vegetables to last through winter, plus extra to preserve. Marin has quite a talent for growing things. It's a skill your daughter might benefit from learning, given how often your family seems to run short on supplies come February. Mrs. Pritchard's face went red. Several people nearby smothered laughs. The Pritchard family's poor planning was a standing joke in Black Hollow. Every winter, they ended up begging neighbors for food because they'd failed to preserve enough. Well, I never... Mrs. Pritchard sputtered. Good morning, Mrs. Pritchard. Elias's tone made it clear the conversation was over. He guided Marin past the woman and into the church, his hand still warm against her back. Inside, they settled into a pew near the front, the Boone family pew, Marin realized, the place where Elias and Emma had sat together, where they'd probably planned to raise their children. She felt like an intruder, but Elias didn't hesitate, and Ivy tugged her down between them with obvious pride. Everyone's looking at us, Marin whispered. Let them look, Elias murmured back. They'll get tired of it eventually. But as Reverend Fletcher began the service, Marin couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into her back. She tried to focus on the sermon, something about forgiveness and new beginnings, but her mind kept wandering. To the whispers, to Mrs. Pritchard's cruel smile, to the fact that no matter how hard she tried, she would always be the fat woman who didn't belong, who'd somehow tricked Elias Boone into marriage. Halfway through the service, Ivy leaned against her shoulder, her small weight warm and trusting. Marin looked down at the little girl and felt her anxiety ease slightly. Ivy didn't care what anyone thought. To Ivy, Marin was simply Mama, the person who braided her hair and told her stories and taught her about healing plants. Maybe that was enough. After the service, people clustered outside the church catching up on news and gossip. Marin would have preferred to escape back to the wagon immediately, but Ivy had spotted her friend Mary Henderson and dragged her over to meet my mama. Mary was a year older than Ivy, with braids so blonde they were almost white. She looked Marin up and down with the brutal honesty of an 8-year-old. You're bigger than I expected, Mary announced. Mary! Her mother, Mrs. Henderson, looked mortified. That's extremely rude. Apologize at once. It's all right, Marin said, though her face burned. Children are honest. It's not the worst thing to be. She's teaching me about plants, Ivy said proudly, either oblivious to the awkwardness or deliberately ignoring it. I know 7 different healing herbs now. Want to see my list? As the girls moved off to compare notes, Mrs. Henderson gave Marin a sympathetic smile. I'm sorry about Mary. She doesn't have a filter yet. Really? It's fine. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing is wonderful. Teaching Ivy about herbs and plants, that's real education. More useful than most of what they'd learn in a schoolroom. Mrs. Henderson glanced around, then lowered her voice. And between you and me, it's nice to see Elias Boone with some life back in his eyes. He's been like a ghost these past 3 years. Whatever you're doing, it's working. Marin felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. Thank you, she managed. That means a lot. Come visit sometime, Mrs. Henderson said. Our ranch is just north of yours. I'd enjoy the company, and the girls clearly get along well. It was such a simple kindness, but it hit Marin like a physical blow. Someone was treating her like a normal person, like she belonged. I'd like that, she said. They were interrupted by a commotion near the general store. A group of men had gathered, their voices raised in argument. Marin saw Elias standing among them, his posture tense. "Excuse me," she told Mrs. Henderson and hurried over. "Nothing but trouble," one of the men was saying. Harold Weeks, the saloon owner, his face red with anger. "You can't just let them pass through unchallenged." "I'm not suggesting we let them pass unchallenged," Elias said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I'm suggesting we don't start shooting before we know what they want. They're drifters. What else would they want but trouble?" "Harold, the last time you accused someone of being trouble, it turned out to be the territorial marshal's brother-in-law. Remember how that went?" Several men chuckled. Harold's face went even redder. "What's happening?" Marin asked quietly, touching Elias's arm. He glanced at her, and she saw the worry in his eyes. Group of men camped about 5 miles south of town. 3, maybe 4 of them. They've been there 2 days. Some folks think they're bandits or cattle thieves. Others think they're just travelers waiting out the heat before moving on. "And you think?" "I think we don't know enough to judge, but tensions are high." He looked back at Harold. "How about we send someone to talk to them? Ask their business. Give them a chance to move on peacefully. And if they don't move on," Harold challenged, "then we deal with it, together, as a town." Elias's gaze swept the group. "But we do it smart, not stupid." There were murmurs of agreement. Harold looked like he wanted to argue more, but enough men were nodding that he backed down with poor grace. As the group dispersed, Elias turned to Marin. "We should head home soon. I don't like the feel of this." "You think those men are dangerous?" "I think any stranger can be dangerous out here." He collected Ivy from where she was still talking with Mary. "Come on, sweetheart, time to go." The ride back to the ranch was quieter than usual. Ivy dozed in the back of the wagon, tired from the excitement of town. Marin sat beside Elias on the bench, watching the mountains slide past, trying to ignore the unease that had settled in her stomach. "You handled Mrs. Pritchard well," Elias said after a while. "You handled her," Marin corrected. "I just stood there." "No. You kept your dignity. That's harder than people think." He was quiet for a moment. "I meant what I said before, about you mattering. I know this hasn't been the marriage you dreamed of. Hell, it hasn't been the marriage I thought I'd have again, but—" He trailed off, struggling for words. "But?" Marin prompted softly. "But I'm glad you're here. I want you to know that. You've made this house feel like a home again. You've brought Ivy back to me. He shook his head. "You've done more than I had any right to expect or ask for." Marin's throat tightened. "I'm glad I'm here too." They looked at each other for a long moment, and something passed between them, something warm and fragile and full of possibility. Elias's hand moved slightly on the reins, as if he wanted to reach for her but didn't quite dare. The moment broke when Ivy sat up suddenly in the back. "Are we almost home? I'm hungry." "Almost," Elias said, his voice rougher than usual. Another 20 minutes. But as they crested the hill that gave them their first view of the ranch, Elias pulled the horses to a stop. His entire body went rigid. "What?" Marin asked. "What's wrong?" He pointed. Down below, near the barn, a horse stood tied to the rail. A horse that didn't belong to them. "Stay here," Elias said, reaching for the rifle he kept under the wagon seat. "Elias, stay here with Ivy. Don't come down until I signal it's safe." His eyes were hard now. All the softness from moments ago vanished. "Promise me." "I promise." He jumped down from the wagon and started walking toward the ranch, the rifle held ready but not raised. Marin watched him go, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Mama," Ivy's voice was small, frightened. "What's happening?" "I don't know, honey." Marin pulled the little girl close. "But your papa will handle it. He always does." They watched as Elias approached the barn. He stopped about 20 feet away and called out something Marin couldn't hear. A figure emerged from the shadows of the barn doorway. A man. Tall, lean, wearing a dusty brown coat and a hat pulled low. He raised his hands in a gesture that could have been surrender or greeting. Elias didn't lower the rifle. They talked. Marin couldn't hear the words, but she could read the tension in every line of Elias's body. The conversation went on for several minutes. Then slowly, Elias lowered the rifle. The stranger lowered his hands. They shook, brief, businesslike, and the stranger walked to his horse. He mounted up and rode away, heading south, back toward Black Hollow. Only then did Elias turn and wave them down. Marin drove the wagon to the house, her hands shaking slightly on the reins. As soon as they stopped, Ivy jumped down and ran to her father. "Who was that, Papa? Was he bad?" "No, sweetheart, just a traveler. He was looking for the Henderson Ranch and got turned around." Elias lifted Ivy and set her on his hip, even though she was getting too big for it. "Go inside and wash up for supper, all right?" "Okay." Ivy kissed his cheek and ran into the house. Marin climbed down more slowly. "Who was he really?" Elias's expression was troubled. "Exactly who I said. A drifter looking for work. But," he shook his head, "something felt off about him, the way he looked around, the questions he asked." "What kind of questions?" "About who lived here, how long we'd been married, whether we had any hired hands." Elias met her eyes. "Whether my wife had any family nearby." Marin's blood went cold. "What did you tell him? That my wife's family is back east, and we don't need hired help?" He stepped closer. "Marin, is there something you need to tell me? Some reason a stranger would be asking about you specifically?" She wanted to lie. Every instinct screamed at her to lie, to protect the fragile life she'd built here. But the look in Elias's eyes, concerned, protective, but also demanding truth, made the lies stick in her throat. "Maybe," she whispered. "I don't know. I ran away from some people years ago. I thought I'd left them behind. I thought I was safe." "What people?" "Dangerous people. People I owed money to. People who—" She couldn't finish. Elias's jaw clenched. "People who might come looking for you." "I don't know. Maybe. I've been so careful. I've moved so much. I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought I'd finally escaped." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "Go inside. Help Ivy with supper. Act normal. Tomorrow morning, I'm riding to Black Hollow to ask around about those drifters camped south of town. If there's trouble coming, I want to know about it before it arrives." "Elias, I'm sorry. I should have told you." "Yes, you should have." He looked at her, and his eyes were hard. "But we'll deal with that later. Right now, I need to know everyone in this house is safe. That includes you. Understand?" She nodded, tears burning in her eyes. "Good." His expression softened slightly. "Go on. And Marin? Whatever's coming, we'll face it. Together. That's what family does." The word family hit her like a blow and a blessing all at once. She went inside on shaking legs, and as she helped Ivy prepare supper, she tried to convince herself that the stranger had been exactly what Elias said, just a lost traveler, that the past wasn't catching up, that she wasn't about to lose everything she'd begun to build here. But that night, lying in her narrow bed, listening to the wind howl through the pines, Marin couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the stranger's shadow in the barn doorway, kept hearing Elias's words, "People who might come looking for you." And she knew, with the cold certainty of someone who'd spent years running, that her time was up. The past had found her, and it was going to take everything. Morning came too soon, gray and cold despite the summer season. Marin stood at the kitchen window, watching fog roll down from the mountains like something alive, swallowing the pine trees in thick white silence. She'd barely slept. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind had sent her bolt upright, heart racing, certain that someone was coming. Elias was already up, dressed in his riding clothes, checking his rifle at the kitchen table. The metallic click of the chamber made Marin flinch. "I'll be back before sunset," he said without looking up. "Keep the doors locked. If anyone comes to the house, anyone you don't know, you take Ivy upstairs to the back bedroom, and you don't come out until you hear my voice. Understand?" "Yes." Her own voice sounded strange to her ears, thin and distant. He finally looked at her then, and his expression softened slightly. "I'm probably being overcautious. Could be nothing. But you don't think it's nothing." "No," he admitted. "I don't." He stood and crossed to her, stopping close enough that she could smell the soap he'd used that morning, the leather of his gun belt. "Marin, whatever you're running from, whoever those people are, I need you to tell me everything, not later, now, before I ride into town asking questions blind. She'd known this moment would come eventually, had rehearsed 1,000 different versions of this conversation in her head over the past months. But now, standing in her kitchen with dawn light bleeding through the fog and fear sitting like a stone in her chest, the words felt impossible. "His name is Rhett Mercer," she said finally, forcing the words out. "He's a debt collector, a criminal, really, but he hides it behind legitimate business. My father owed him money, $800. When my father died, Rhett said the debt passed to me and my sister Clara." Elias's jaw tightened. And? And when I couldn't pay, he said he'd take Clara instead, sell her to a brothel in San Francisco. Marin's hands twisted together, her knuckles white. She was 15 years old, just a child. So I took her, and I ran. How long ago? 9 years. The number felt impossible. Had it really been that long? We were separated in the mountains during a storm. I searched for weeks, but I never found her. I don't know if Rhett caught her, or if she died out there, or... Her voice broke. I don't know. Elias was very still. And you think this Rhett might be looking for you? I don't know. Maybe. The debt was his excuse, but he's the kind of man who doesn't like being cheated, who doesn't like losing. She met his eyes. Who doesn't forget? What does he look like? Tall, dark hair, going gray now probably, scar on his left hand from a knife fight, cold eyes, the kind that look right through you like you're not even human. She shuddered. But he won't come himself if he's found me. He'll send someone first to scout, to confirm. Like the stranger yesterday. Maybe. Elias nodded slowly, processing. All right. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to town to find out who those drifters are and what they want. While I'm gone, you're going to pack a bag for yourself and Ivy, just essentials, things you can carry. Put it in the root cellar under a tarp. If something happens and you need to run, you'll have supplies ready. I won't leave you, Marin said immediately. You will if I tell you to. His voice was hard. Ivy's safety comes first, always. If Rhett or his men come here and I can't stop them, you take my daughter and you run. The Hendersons will help you. Tom Henderson owes me from when I helped him through that bad winter 5 years ago. You go there, you tell him I sent you, and he'll get you somewhere safe. Elias, promise me, Marin. He gripped her shoulders. Whatever happens, Ivy survives. Promise me. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she was done running, done leaving people behind. But the fear in his eyes, fear for his daughter, was something she understood bone deep. I promise, she whispered. He studied her face a moment longer, then pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace. It was the first time he'd held her like that, and she felt the strength in his arms, the solid reality of him. When he pulled back, his eyes were clearer. I'll be back soon, he said. With any luck, this is all just me being paranoid. But they both knew he wasn't. He left as the sun was burning through the fog, riding hard toward Black Hollow. Marin watched until he disappeared into the trees, then turned back to the house where Ivy was just waking up. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Marin kept herself busy, kneading bread dough with more force than necessary, scrubbing floors that were already clean, checking the locks on doors and windows 6 times. She packed the emergency bag like Elias had instructed, her hands shaking as she folded clothes and wrapped food in oilcloth. 2 canteens of water, matches, a knife, the small amount of money she'd managed to save, her mother's wedding dress, because she couldn't bear to leave it behind. Ivy sensed something was wrong. She was quieter than usual, watching Marin with worried eyes. Why did Papa take his rifle? She asked at lunch, pushing food around her plate without eating. Just being careful, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about. You're lying. It wasn't accusatory, just a statement of fact. You have your scared face on, the one you get when you think I'm not looking. Marin's throat tightened, 7 years old and already too perceptive. I'm not scared, I'm just being cautious. That's what Papa always says when he's scared. Ivy set down her fork. Is someone bad coming? There was no point in lying. Ivy would see through it, and she deserved better than false comfort. Maybe. I don't know for sure. But your Papa and I, we're going to make sure you're safe no matter what. That's a promise. What about you? Ivy's voice was very small. Who keeps you safe? Marin reached across the table and took the little girl's hand. Your papa, and you, and myself. We keep each other safe. That's what families do. Ivy's eyes welled with tears. I don't want anyone to take you away. No one's going to take me away. You don't know that. They took Mama Emma. Death took her and there was nothing Papa could do. Ivy was crying now, all the fear she'd been holding in spilling out. What if someone takes you too? What if I lose another mama? Marin came around the table and pulled Ivy into her arms, holding her tight while she sobbed. Listen to me, she said fiercely. Listen, I am not going anywhere. I fought too hard to get here, to find you and your papa. I'm not giving up without a fight. Do you hear me? Ivy nodded against her shoulder, her small body shaking. I need you to be brave, Marin continued. Just for today. Can you do that for me? Another nod. Good girl. Marin pulled back and wiped Ivy's tears with her thumbs. Now, I want you to do something for me. Go upstairs and get that book you've been reading. We're going to sit on the porch, and you're going to read to me, just like a normal day. Can you do that? Ivy sniffled and nodded again. She ran upstairs and Marin took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. She felt like she was coming apart at the seams, terror and guilt and desperate hope all tangled together in her chest. They spent the afternoon on the porch, Ivy reading haltingly from her book, while Marin pretended to listen. Really, she was watching the tree line, watching the road, watching for any sign of movement. The shadows grew longer, the air turned cool, and still Elias didn't return. By the time the sun started to set, Marin's nerves were stretched wire-thin. It had been more than 10 hours. He'd said he'd be back before sunset. Maybe we should go inside now, she told Ivy, trying to keep her voice casual. Wait, Ivy pointed. Someone's coming. Marin's heart leaped into her throat. A rider was approaching from the direction of Black Hollow, moving fast. For a wild moment, she couldn't tell if it was Elias or someone else. Then she recognized the horse, the set of the rider's shoulders. It's Papa! Ivy jumped up and ran down the porch steps. Ivy, wait! But the little girl was already racing toward her father. Elias dismounted before his horse had fully stopped and caught Ivy up in his arms. Even from the porch, Marin could see the tension in him, the grim set of his mouth. Her stomach dropped. He carried Ivy back to the house and set her down. Go inside, sweetheart. Start getting ready for bed. But it's still light out. Now, Ivy. Something in his tone made the little girl obey without further argument. She cast one worried look at Marin, then disappeared into the house. Elias waited until the door closed before he spoke. It's him. Rhett Mercer. He's in Black Hollow. Has been for 2 days asking questions about you. The world tilted. Marin gripped the porch rail to steady herself. How do you know? Tom Henderson told me. Mercer's been talking to people in town, showing around a sketch of a woman who looks enough like you that several people mentioned it. He's calling himself a bounty hunter, says you're wanted for theft back east, says there's a reward for information leading to your capture. That's a lie. I never stole. I know. Elias's voice was hard. But he's spreading the story, and people are listening. Mrs. Pritchard told him about our marriage, about where the ranch is located. Of course she did. Marin wanted to scream, to cry, to run right now, and never stop, but she forced herself to breathe, to think. What are we going to do? We're going to face him. Elias climbed the porch steps and stood close to her, his eyes intense. Tomorrow morning, I'm riding back to town. I'm going to tell Mercer that if he has business with my wife, he can conduct it legally through the territorial marshal. If he doesn't, he can get the hell out of Black Hollow. He won't leave, not just because you tell him to. Tell him. Then he'll leave because the entire town tells him to. Elias's jaw set. I talked to the other ranchers today. The Hendersons, the Callaways, even Harold Weeks. Nobody likes the idea of some outsider coming in and threatening one of our own. If Mercer wants trouble, he'll get more than he bargained for. Marin stared at him. Why would they help me? They hate me. They don't hate you. They were just being small and petty because they didn't know you. But when I explained the situation, when they understood what this man wants to do, they changed their tune fast. He reached out and took her hand. You're one of us now, Marin. You're a rancher's wife. You belong to Black Hollow, whether Mrs. Pritchard likes it or not, and we protect our own. Tears spilled down Marin's cheeks. She couldn't stop them. For 9 years she'd been alone, running, hiding, trusting no one. And now this man, this stern, difficult, grieving man, was telling her she wasn't alone anymore. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "I don't deserve you." "That's not for you to decide." He pulled her into his arms, and this time she let herself collapse against him, let herself be held. "I should have told you weeks ago, but I'm not good with words. I'm better with actions. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stand between you and this bastard. I'm going to make it clear that if he wants to hurt you, he'll have to go through me first. And then I'm going to make him wish he'd never heard the name Marin Boone." The way he said her married name, with possession and pride, made something fierce and warm unfold in her chest. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good. That means you're smart." He pulled back to look at her face. "But being scared doesn't mean we run. It means we fight together." She nodded, wiping her eyes. Together. They went inside and tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Ivy's sake. Dinner was a quiet affair. Afterward, Marin tucked Ivy into bed and sat with her until she fell asleep, one hand stroking the little girl's dark hair. "I love you," Marin whispered, though Ivy couldn't hear her. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that. You saved me, you and your papa. You gave me a reason to stop running." She stayed until Ivy's breathing was deep and even, then crept out of the room. She found Elias in his office, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. He looked up as she entered. "She asleep?" "Yes." Marin closed the door behind her. "Elias, if something happens tomorrow, if Rhett gets past you somehow, I need you to know something. Nothing's going to happen. But if it does..." She crossed to him, her heart pounding. "I need you to know that these past months have been the happiest of my life. That marrying you was the best decision I ever made, even if it started as just survival. That I..." The words stuck in her throat. He set down the rifle and stood, closing the distance between them in 2 steps. "Say it. I love you." The words came out in a rush. "I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. I love you and Ivy more than I thought I could love anything. And if Rhett takes me tomorrow, I need you to know that. I need you to tell Ivy that I didn't leave because I wanted to, that I would have stayed forever if I could." Elias's hands came up to cup her face. His gray eyes, usually so guarded, were blazing with emotion. "Nobody's taking you anywhere, you hear me? Nobody." Then he kissed her. It wasn't like the chaste peck at their wedding. This was real, desperate, full of all the things neither of them knew how to say. Marin's hands fisted in his shirt, and she kissed him back with 9 years of loneliness and fear and hope all tangled together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said roughly. "Took me too long to realize it, but I do. Emma will always be part of my past, but you're my future, you and Ivy. That's all that matters." They stood there holding each other while the night deepened outside, both trying to memorize this moment in case it was all they'd ever have. Neither of them slept much that night. Marin lay in her bed listening to the house settle, listening to Elias pace in his room across the hall, listening to her own heartbeat count down the hours until morning. When dawn finally came, pale and cold, she was almost relieved. The waiting was over. Elias left early, before Ivy woke up. He kissed Marin at the door, long and hard, then swung up into his saddle. "If I'm not back by noon, take Ivy and go to the Hendersons." "Elias? Promise me." "I promise." The words tasted like ash. He rode away, and Marin stood on the porch watching until he was out of sight. Then she went inside to wait. The morning crept by. Marin tried to keep busy, tried to keep Ivy distracted with lessons and chores, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. At 11:30, Ivy was upstairs practicing her letters when Marin heard horses. Multiple horses. She ran to the window and felt her blood turn to ice. 4 riders were approaching the ranch. Even from a distance, she could see that none of them was Elias. "Ivy!" she called up the stairs, trying to keep her voice steady. "Come here, sweetheart. Right now." Ivy appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale. "Is it Papa?" "No." Marin held out her hand. "Come on, we're going to play a game." "I don't want to play a game. I want Papa." "I know, honey, but we need to do what Papa said. Remember? We keep each other safe." Marin took Ivy's hand and pulled her toward the back of the house. We're going upstairs to the back bedroom, and we're going to be very, very quiet, like we're hiding from bandits. Can you do that? Ivy's eyes were huge with fear, but she nodded. They had just reached the stairs when someone pounded on the front door. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. Mrs. Boone, a man's voice smooth and cold. I know you're in there. Let's not make this difficult. Marin's legs nearly gave out. That voice. She knew that voice. 9 years and she still knew it. Rhett Mercer had come. She pushed Ivy up the stairs ahead of her. Go, back bedroom, under the bed. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Mama, go. Ivy ran. Marin heard her footsteps overhead, heard the creak of the back bedroom door. Then she turned to face the front of the house, her mind racing. The rifle was in Elias's office. If she could get to it, maybe... The front door crashed open. Marin hadn't locked it. In her panic to get Ivy upstairs, she'd forgotten to lock it. 4 men walked into her home like they owned it. 3 of them were strangers, rough-looking hired guns with dead eyes and easy violence in their postures. But the 4th man, the one in front, she recognized instantly. Rhett Mercer had aged. His dark hair was streaked with gray now, and new lines carved deep grooves around his mouth. But he still had those same cold eyes, and when he smiled at her, Marin felt like she was 22 again, helpless and terrified. Hello, Marin, he said pleasantly. It's been a long time. She forced herself to stand straight to meet his gaze. Get out of my house. Your house? He looked around with exaggerated interest. My, you've come up in the world. Married to a rancher now, I hear. The fat girl who thought she was too good for honest work ended up a frontier wife. How touching. I said get out. Or what? He took a step closer. You'll call your husband. I already dealt with him. He's currently having a conversation with the territorial marshal in Black Hollow about assault charges. Seems he started a fight in the saloon this morning and hospitalized 2 men. He'll be tied up for hours, maybe days depending on how things go. Marin's heart sank. It was a trap. All of it. Rhett had maneuvered Elias out of the way deliberately. What do you want? She asked, though she already knew. The same thing I wanted 9 years ago. My money. $800 plus 9 years of interest. That comes to about $2,000 now. His smile widened. Or we can settle accounts another way. You still have that sister, little Clara? I never did get to collect on her. Where is she? Dead. The lie came easily. She had no idea if Clara was alive or dead, but she'd be damned before she told this monster anything. She died in the mountains. So did your money, since you'll never see a cent from me. I figured as much. Rhett sighed theatrically. Well, that's unfortunate. But there are other ways to collect debts. Your husband has a nice ranch here. Good land, healthy cattle. I bet if it burned down, he'd be motivated to pay your debts just to make me go away. Terror spiked through her. Don't you dare. Or, Rhett continued, there's the child. I hear you've gotten attached to the rancher's daughter. Pretty little thing from what I saw. What's her name? Ivy? He let the name hang in the air like a threat. Marin's vision went red. Without thinking, she lunged for him, her hands curled into claws. I'll kill you before I let you touch her. One of his men caught her easily, twisting her arm behind her back hard enough to make her cry out. Rhett just laughed. There she is. There's the fighter I remember. You know, you were always more interesting when you were angry. He walked closer, his boots loud on the wooden floor. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to come with us, quietly, without resistance. And in exchange, I'll leave your precious new family alone. The ranch doesn't burn. The child stays safe. Your husband goes on with his life. He'll think you ran away because you couldn't face your past. Sad, but he'll survive. Men always do. No. Marin struggled against the man holding her. No, I won't. You will, because if you don't, I'll burn this house to the ground with the child inside it, and I'll make sure your husband knows it was your fault, that you could have prevented it by just doing what you were told. Rhett's voice went hard. I always collect my debts, Marin. One way or another, so choose. Come with me or watch everything you love turn to ash. Marin's mind raced. She couldn't fight 4 armed men. She couldn't protect Ivy alone. Elias was miles away, probably locked in a cell. And upstairs, hidden under the bed, was a 7-year-old girl who'd already lost one mother. She couldn't let Ivy lose another. Not like this. Not in fire and violence. Let me say goodbye to her, Marin said, her voice breaking. Please, let me tell her I'm leaving. She deserves that much. Rhett considered, then nodded. You have 5 minutes, and if you try anything clever, my men burn the house anyway. Understood? Understood. The man holding her released her arm. Marin walked toward the stairs on shaking legs, every step feeling like a betrayal. Behind her, she could feel Rhett's eyes following her, cold and triumphant. She climbed the stairs and walked down the hallway to the back bedroom. The door was closed. She opened it and stepped inside. Ivy? She called softly. It's okay. You can come out now. A small, tear-stained face emerged from under the bed. Mama, who are those men? Marin knelt down and pulled Ivy into her arms, holding her so tight it must have hurt. Listen to me very carefully, sweetheart. Those men are here because of me, because of something that happened a long time ago, and I have to go with them. No, Ivy clutched at her. Don't leave me. Please don't leave me. I don't want to, but I have to keep you safe. Marin pulled back and gripped Ivy's shoulders, looking into her eyes. I need you to be the bravest you've ever been. Stay in this room until you hear your papa's voice. Don't come out for anyone else. When he gets home, you tell him I said to find Tom Henderson. Tell him those exact words. Find Tom Henderson. Can you remember that? Find Tom Henderson, Ivy repeated through her sobs. Good girl. Marin kissed her forehead, her cheeks, memorizing the feel of her. I love you so much. You're the best daughter anyone could ask for, and your papa loves you more than anything in the world. You remember that, no matter what happens. Promise me. I promise. Mama, please. I have to go now. Marin stood, her legs barely holding her. Stay here. Stay hidden. Stay safe. She walked out of the room before Ivy's crying could break her resolve. She closed the door behind her and stood for a moment, her hand on the wood, tears streaming down her face. Then she went back downstairs. Rhett was waiting. Touching farewell? Go to hell. After you. He gestured to the door. Shall we? Marin walked out of her home and into the yard. The morning sun was bright and harsh, making everything sharp-edged and too real. One of the men brought a horse, not hers, she noticed distantly. They were taking no chances. As she mounted, she looked back at the house one last time. Somewhere inside, Ivy was hiding, crying, terrified. And somewhere beyond the mountains, Elias was probably fighting to get free, to get home. She'd promised to stay. She'd promised not to run. But some promises couldn't be kept when the choice was between keeping them and keeping the people you loved alive. Rhett mounted his own horse and smiled at her. It's almost like old times, isn't it? Marin didn't answer. She was done talking to him, done giving him anything. She'd go with him. She'd buy Ivy time. She'd buy Elias time. And when the moment came, when her chance arrived, she'd make Rhett Mercer regret the day he'd ever laid eyes on her family. Because she'd learned something important over these past months at the Boone Ranch. She'd learned she was worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth love. And people who had something worth protecting were the most dangerous kind. The horses started moving, heading south, away from Black Hollow and the mountains and everything that mattered. Marin didn't look back again. She couldn't bear to. But she made a promise to herself, silent and fierce. I will survive this. I will escape. And I will come home. No matter what it takes, no matter how long, I will come home. They rode for 3 hours through country that grew progressively rougher and more isolated. Rhett kept them moving at a brutal pace, stopping only once to water the horses at a creek that ran cold and fast from the mountain snowmelt. Marin's wrists were bound to the saddle horn with leather straps that cut into her skin with every jolt and sway of the horse. Her mind, though, was racing faster than any horse could run. She counted the men. 4 total. Rhett and 3 hired guns. The one called Pike rode point, a scarred brute with dead eyes who looked like he'd killed before and would kill again without hesitation. The second, younger but no less dangerous, they called Sutton. He kept watching her with a mixture of curiosity and contempt that made her skin crawl. The third man, older and quiet, rode at the rear. They hadn't used his name, but he carried himself with the careful precision of someone who'd survived by being smarter than everyone else. 4 men, 4 guns, and her with bound hands and no weapon. The odds were impossible, But Marin had survived impossible before. They finally stopped as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, pulling up in a narrow canyon with steep rock walls on three sides. A defensible position, Marin noted with sinking dread. Someone had planned this carefully. Pike dismounted and began setting up camp with efficient, practiced movements. Sutton pulled Marin roughly from her saddle, and she stumbled, her legs numb from hours of riding. He shoved her toward a flat rock near what would be their fire pit. "Sit," he ordered. "Don't move." She sat. Rhett approached, pulling off his riding gloves with deliberate slowness. He'd always had a theatrical streak, she remembered. Everything was a performance with him. "Comfortable?" he asked pleasantly. "What happens now?" Marin kept her voice steady with effort. "Now? Now we wait." He crouched down so he was eye level with her. "I have a buyer lined up in Denver, man who runs a string of establishments across the territory. He's always looking for new girls, especially ones with a bit of maturity. The young ones don't last long in his business." Marin's stomach turned. "So you're selling me to a brothel, just like you threatened to do to Clara?" "Business is business. You cost me a fortune when you ran 9 years ago. I've been looking for you ever since, did you know that? Checking every settlement, every mining camp, every nowhere town from Nevada to Montana. I'd almost given up. Then I heard about a rancher in Black Hollow who'd married some fat drifter woman in a pathetic ceremony. The description was too perfect to ignore." He smiled. "Lucky me. Elias will come for me." "Your husband?" Rhett laughed. "By the time he gets out of jail and figures out what happened, we'll be 3 states away. And even if he somehow tracks us down, what's he going to do? He's one man. I have an army. Face it, Marin, this is where your story ends. You should have just paid the debt 9 years ago. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." "I didn't have $800. You know I didn't." "Then you should have worked harder." He stood. "Get some rest. We ride at dawn. It's a long way to Denver, and I need you alive and reasonably intact when we get there. Damaged goods fetch lower prices." He walked away to confer with his men. Marin sat on her rock, her bound hands resting in her lap, and tried to think. The canyon walls were too steep to climb, especially in the dark. Even if she got her hands free, she'd never outrun 4 mounted men on foot. And if she tried and failed, they'd probably kill her just to avoid the hassle. No. Running wasn't the answer. Not yet. She needed to be smart, patient, wait for the right moment. But every mile they traveled was a mile farther from Ivy, from Elias, from home. As darkness fell and the men built up the fire, Marin watched Pike pull out a bottle of whiskey. He took a long drink and passed it to Sutton. Good. If they drank enough, they'd get sloppy. Guards got careless when they were drunk. She just had to survive until they made a mistake. Hours passed. The men talked and drank, their voices growing louder and less careful. Marin kept her head down, trying to look defeated and broken, while she tested the leather straps on her wrists. They were tight, but not impossibly so. If she could work them loose just a little, create some slack. "Hey!" Sutton appeared in front of her, swaying slightly. The whiskey had hit him hard. "You hungry?" She was starving, actually, but she shook her head. Better to appear weak and pitiful. "Suit yourself?" He sat down heavily beside her. Too close. She could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You're not much to look at, but Rhett says you've got spirit. Says you ran all the way to Montana to get away from him. That true?" Marin didn't answer. "I asked you a question." His hand shot out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "That true?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Brave or stupid?" He leaned closer, studying her face. "Can't decide which." "Leave her alone, Sutton." Pike's voice cut across the camp. "Rhett wants her unmarked." "I'm just talking to her." But Sutton released her chin and stood. For now. He wandered back to the fire, and Marin let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her heart was racing, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. Wait. Be patient. The moment will come. She must have dozed off at some point because she jerked awake to find the camp mostly dark. The fire had burned down to embers. 2 of the men were asleep in their bedrolls. Pike sat watch, but his head kept nodding forward. The whiskey had done its work after all. Marin's hands had worked the leather straps loose enough that she could almost pull one hand free. She twisted carefully, slowly, her eyes never leaving Pike. The leather burned as it scraped across her skin, but she bit her lip and kept working. Almost there. Almost. Her right hand slipped free. She froze, barely breathing, waiting to see if anyone had noticed. But the camp remained quiet except for the crackling of dying embers and the soft snores of sleeping men. Now what? She was free? But she was in the middle of nowhere with no horse, no weapon, no supplies. If she ran now, they'd track her down within hours. She needed something to slow them down, something to even the odds. Her eyes fell on the pile of saddles and gear near the horses. The horses. If she could scatter them, the men would have to spend hours tracking them down. That would give her a head start. Maybe enough to reach Black Hollow or the Henderson Ranch before they caught up. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot she had. Marin eased herself off the rock, moving with agonizing slowness. Every small sound seemed deafening in the quiet night. Pike's head jerked up once, and she froze, her heart hammering, but he was just shifting position. His eyes stayed closed. She crept toward the horses. They were tied to a rope line strung between two trees, all 5 of them standing hip-shot and drowsy. She reached the first one, Pike's big bay gelding, and ran her hand along its neck, soothing it into silence. The knot holding the rope line was tied tight. She picked at it with fingers that shook from adrenaline and fear. "Come on! Come on!" The knot gave. The rope fell slack. Marin grabbed a saddle blanket and waved it suddenly, sharply. "Yah!" The horses exploded into motion, scattering in all directions with startled whinnies and the thunder of hooves on stone. Behind her, men shouted. Pike was on his feet, fumbling for his gun. Rhett rolled out of his bedroll, cursing, but Marin was already running. She hit the canyon floor at a dead sprint, running toward the narrow gap that served as the only exit. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed in protest after hours tied to a saddle, but she pushed harder, faster, because this was her only chance. "After her!" Rhett's voice sharp with fury. "Don't let her get away!" Gunfire cracked behind her. The bullet whined off a rock to her left. She zigzagged, making herself a harder target, and plunged into the gap between the canyon walls. The space was barely wide enough for a horse, tight and claustrophobic. Marin ran with her hands out, feeling her way in the darkness, her breath coming in harsh gasps. Behind her, she could hear the men shouting, organizing, starting pursuit on foot since the horses had scattered. She had minutes at best. The gap opened onto a steep hillside covered in loose rock and scrub pine. Marin half ran, half slid down it, branches tearing at her clothes and face. She didn't care. All that mattered was distance. Every yard between her and Rhett was a yard closer to survival. At the bottom of the hill was a creek, the same one they'd watered the horses at earlier. Marin splashed into it without hesitation, the icy water soaking her to the knees. She turned upstream, running through the water to hide her trail. It was a trick she'd learned years ago, running from wolves in the Nevada wilderness. She ran until her legs gave out. Then she ran some more. And when she finally collapsed behind a fallen log, gasping and shaking, the sky was just beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. She'd bought herself time. Not much, but some. Now she just had to figure out where she was and how to get home. The sun rose on a landscape Marin didn't recognize. She'd been moving in darkness, running blind. And now in the gray light of morning, she realized she had no idea which direction was north. The mountains surrounded her on all sides, their peaks identical and disorienting. She sat behind her fallen log, trying to calm her racing heart and think. Water ran downhill. If she followed the creek downstream, it would eventually lead to larger water, maybe even Black Hollow Creek. From there she could orient herself. Be brave for herself, find her way to the Henderson Ranch or back to town. But downstream might also lead her straight into Rhett's men if they were smart enough to follow the same logic. Upstream then, higher into the mountains. She could circle around, come at Black Hollow from a different direction. It would take longer, but it was safer. Marin pulled herself to her feet, every muscle in her body protesting. Her dress was torn and filthy. Her hands were bleeding from the rocks. She was exhausted, terrified, and lost in the wilderness. But she'd been lost before, and she'd survived. She started walking upstream. The morning wore on. The sun climbed higher, and with it came the brutal heat of a summer day in the high country. Marin's throat grew parched. She drank from the creek, knowing the water might make her sick, but having no choice. She found wild strawberries growing in a sunny patch and ate them, her stomach cramping with hunger. By midday, she was stumbling, dizzy with exhaustion and dehydration. But she kept moving because stopping meant dying. And then she heard it. Voices. Men's voices. Echoing off the canyon walls. Rhett had found her trail. Marin's vision grayed at the edges. No, not now. She'd come too far. She forced herself to move faster, climbing over rocks, pushing through brush. The voices grew closer. They were tracking her systematically, spreading out to cover more ground. She was going to be caught. After everything, after the escape and the running and the desperate hope, they were going to catch her. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Marin tried to scream, to fight, but an arm like iron wrapped around her waist and lifted her bodily off the ground. She was dragged backward into dense undergrowth, branches scraping her face. "Stop fighting," a voice hissed in her ear. Male. Unfamiliar. "I'm trying to help you, you damn fool woman." Marin went still. The hand over her mouth loosened slightly. "I'm going to let you go," the voice continued, low and urgent. "But if you scream, those men will find you in seconds. Nod if you understand." She nodded. The hands released her. Marin spun around and found herself face to face with a man she'd never seen before. He was native, Salish maybe, or Blackfeet, with long dark hair and weathered skin that spoke of years in the mountains. He carried a rifle and wore buckskin clothing that blended perfectly with the forest. "Who are you?" Marin whispered. "Doesn't matter. Those men hunting you, they're bad men. I've been watching them since yesterday." His dark eyes assessed her critically. "You're Boone's wife." It wasn't a question. Marin nodded anyway. "Thought so. Henderson sent word through the territory, said Boone's woman was taken, asked everyone to watch for her." He jerked his head upstream. "Come on. There's a cave a mile from here. They won't find it if you're quiet." "Why are you helping me?" "Because Elias Boone helped my sister through a bad winter 3 years ago. Gave her food and shelter when she needed it. I pay my debts." He started moving through the undergrowth with barely a sound. "Now move before they circle around and cut us off." Marin followed, hope surging in her chest. Someone was looking for her. Tom Henderson had spread the word. Elias was trying to find her. She wasn't alone. They reached the cave just as the voices of Rhett's men grew dangerously close. It was little more than a crack in the rock face, hidden behind a screen of juniper bushes, but inside it opened into a space large enough for 2 people to crouch comfortably. The man pushed her inside and followed, then positioned himself at the entrance with his rifle ready. They waited in tense silence. Footsteps crunched on the rocks outside. Marin held her breath. "Trail goes cold here," Sutton's voice, frustrated and angry. "She can't have just disappeared. She's got to be close." That was Pike. "Spread out. Check every hiding spot." The footsteps moved around the cave entrance. Marin pressed herself against the back wall, making herself as small as possible. The man beside her didn't move, barely seemed to breathe. Minutes passed like hours. Then finally the voices faded as the searchers moved on. The man waited another 10 minutes before he spoke. "They'll be back. Can't stay here long." "I need to get to Black Hollow," Marin said, "or the Henderson Ranch. I need to find my husband." "Your husband is out looking for you. Has been since yesterday when he got out of jail. Half the territory is looking for you." The man studied her. "But those men won't give up. They'll keep hunting until they find you, or until something makes them stop." "Like what?" "Like being dead or arrested." He met her eyes. "Or like being convinced you're not worth the trouble." An idea was forming in Marin's mind. Dangerous. Reckless. But possibly their only option. What if we led them into a trap? What if we got them all together and then, "You can't fight 4 armed men." "No, but if my husband knew where they were, if he had help." She gripped his arm. "Can you get a message to Elias? Tell him where to find Rhett's camp." The man considered. "Maybe, but that means you have to go back to them. Let them catch you again." "I know." The thought made her sick with fear. But what choice did she have? If she kept running, Rhett would keep chasing. He'd never stop. And eventually, he might decide that hurting her family was easier than capturing her. No. This ended now, one way or another. "If I go back, I can slow them down," Marin said. "Make excuses, pretend I'm injured, whatever it takes. That gives you time to find Elias and bring help. Then, when Rhett has me back at his camp, thinking he's won, you all can—" "It's a terrible plan," the man interrupted. "It's the only plan we have." He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. Boone married a crazy woman. But all right, I'll do it. Give me until sunset. If I can't find him by then, I'll come back and we'll try something else. Thank you. Marin's voice broke. I don't even know your name. Calls the storm. My sister is Sarah Whitecloud. She lives near your ranch. Thank you, Calls the storm, for everything. He nodded once, then slipped out of the cave and disappeared into the forest like smoke. Marin waited, counting her breaths, gathering her courage. Then she stepped out of the cave and deliberately snapped a branch underfoot. The sound echoed through the trees. She took a deep breath and started walking, making no effort to hide her trail now. Within minutes, she heard the shout of discovery. Over here! I found her! Footsteps pounded toward her. Marin stopped and turned to face them, her chin up, her hands at her sides. She wouldn't run. Not this time. Sutton emerged from the trees first, his gun drawn. When he saw her just standing there, waiting, confusion flickered across his face. Well, well, he said. Gave up, did you? Something like that. Marin's voice was steady. I'm tired of running. Pike and the quiet man appeared moments later. Pike grabbed her arm roughly. Rhett's going to skin you alive for this stunt. Probably. Marin didn't resist as they tied her hands again, this time with rope instead of leather. But I'm done fighting. I'll go to Denver. I'll do whatever he wants. I'm done. They marched her back through the forest to where Rhett waited with the recaptured horses. His face was a mask of cold fury. He walked up to her and backhanded her across the face hard enough that she tasted blood. Stupid, he said quietly. Incredibly stupid. Did you really think you could get away from me? Marin spat blood. I had to try. And now you've wasted a full day of travel time. We'll have to ride through the night to make up for it. He grabbed her jaw, forcing her to look at him. If you try anything like that again, I'll go back to Black Hollow and burn your precious ranch to the ground with everyone in it. Understand? I understand. And she did. She understood that this man was a monster, that he'd destroy everything she loved without a second thought. But she also understood that Calls the Storm was out there somewhere, carrying her message to Elias. That help was coming. She just had to survive until it arrived. They rode hard as the sun set, Rhett pushing them mercilessly. Marin's entire body was one massive ache, but she gritted her teeth and endured. Every mile they traveled was a mile closer to sunset, closer to the deadline she'd given Calls the Storm. When full darkness fell, Rhett finally called a halt. They were in another canyon, this one wider and more exposed than the last. A creek ran along one side, and there were signs that other travelers had camped here before. Fire pits, cleared spaces for bedrolls. The men set up camp with grim efficiency. No one spoke to Marin. They tied her to a tree this time, her hands behind her back, the rope tight enough that her fingers went numb. She sat in the darkness and watched the stars come out one by one. Somewhere out there, Elias was looking for her. Somewhere, help was coming. All she had to do was hold on. The night wore on. The men ate dried meat and hardtack, drank more whiskey, settled into their bedrolls one by one. Pike took first watch, sitting near the fire with his rifle across his knees. Marin dozed fitfully, her back against the rough bark of the tree, and dreamed of Ivy, of Elias, of the ranch and the garden and mornings watching the sun rise over the mountains. She dreamed of home. A hand shook her awake. She jerked, disoriented, and found Pike standing over her. "Wake up," he said. "Someone's coming." Marin's heart leaped. Was it Elias? Had Calls the Storm found him? But Pike wasn't acting like they were under attack. He cut her bonds and hauled her to her feet, shoving her toward the fire where Rhett and the others were gathering. 4 riders were approaching the camp, torches held high. As they drew closer, Marin's hope died. She didn't recognize any of them. They weren't Elias. They weren't help. They were more of Rhett's men. "Took you long enough?" Rhett called out as the riders dismounted. "Any trouble?" "None," one of them replied. He was older than the others, with a face like a ferret. Had to circle around some ranchers who were asking questions, but they didn't follow us. "Good." Rhett turned to Marin. "See? I have friends everywhere. Even if your husband somehow tracks us this far, he'll be outnumbered 2 to 1. You're not going to be rescued. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." 8 men now. 8 armed men against Elias and whoever he might bring with him. Marin felt despair settle over her like a heavy blanket. She'd been so sure, so certain that her plan would work. But maybe she'd been a fool. Maybe this was where her story really ended. As the new arrivals settled into camp and the men began passing around more whiskey, Marin sat by the fire and stared into the flames. She'd tried everything, fought, ran, planned, hoped, and she was still here, still a prisoner, still being dragged toward a fate worse than death. The hopelessness was crushing. For the first time since leaving the ranch, she felt tears slide down her cheeks. Crying now? Rhett settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. That's not the Marin I remember. You had more fight in you. Maybe I'm tired of fighting. Maybe. He watched the fire. You know, this didn't have to be this way. If you'd just done what I asked 9 years ago, none of this would have happened. Your sister would still be alive. You'd be... Don't. Marin's voice was sharp. Don't you dare talk about Clara. Struck a nerve? He smiled. She's the real tragedy in all this. Sweet little thing. Could have had a good life if you hadn't dragged her into the mountains to die. I was trying to save her from you. And look how well that worked out. Rhett stood. Get some sleep. We ride at dawn, and we're not stopping until we reach Denver. He walked away, leaving Marin alone by the fire. She sat there as the camp settled into sleep around her, guards posted, her hands tied again, all hope draining away like water through a sieve. And then, from the darkness beyond the firelight, came a sound like the whisper of wind through grass. An arrow punched through the nearest guard's throat before he could scream. Then all hell broke loose. The camp exploded into chaos. Men shouted, scrambling for weapons as arrows hissed through the darkness like vengeful spirits. A second guard fell, clutching at the shaft protruding from his chest. The fire illuminated their panic in stark, flickering shadows. Marin threw herself sideways, rolling away from the firelight into the relative safety of darkness. Her bound hands made the movement clumsy, desperate, but she kept rolling until she hit the base of a boulder. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting the night in brief, blinding bursts. "They're in the rocks!" Pike's voice, high with fear. "I can't see them!" "Return fire, you idiots!" Rhett was on his feet, his revolver in hand, firing blindly into the darkness. "Don't just stand there!" But his men were shooting at shadows. The attackers were invisible, using the night and the terrain like a weapon. Another arrow found its mark, and Sutton went down screaming, the shaft buried in his thigh. Then Marin heard a sound that made her heart soar, a voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Mercer, this is Elias Boone. You're surrounded. Throw down your weapons or we'll cut you all down where you stand." "Elias," Marin breathed. He'd come. He'd actually come. Rhett's face twisted with rage. "Boone! You think a few arrows scare me? I've got 8 men here. You're outnumbered." "You had 8 men," Elias's voice echoed from somewhere in the rocks above them. "Now you've got 5, and I've got 20 ranchers up here with rifles pointed at your heads. Your choice is simple. Surrender or die." It was a bluff. It had to be. There was no way Elias had 20 men. But in the darkness, with arrows coming from multiple directions and the bodies of his men bleeding on the ground, Rhett couldn't be sure. "Papa." A different voice now, younger. Tom Henderson. "We've got them in a crossfire. Just give the word." Rhett's men were backing toward each other, their weapons raised but their movements uncertain. They were hired guns, not soldiers. They'd signed on for easy money, not a pitched battle in the dark against an unknown number of enemies. "Rhett!" Pike's voice was shaking. "We need to get out of here." "Shut up." Rhett grabbed the nearest man, the quiet one who'd said nothing through 2 days of travel, and shoved him toward where Marin was hiding. "Find the woman! She's our leverage!" But the man had barely taken 2 steps when a rifle shot cracked from the rocks. The bullet kicked up dust at his feet and he stumbled backward with a curse. "Next one goes through your skull." Elias's voice was cold as winter iron. "Touch my wife and it's the last thing you ever do." Marin's chest tightened with emotion so fierce it was almost painful. He'd called her his wife. Not his responsibility, not his burden. His wife. Rhett's face had gone pale in the firelight. He was calculating odds, weighing options, and Marin could see the moment he realized he was beaten. His jaw clenched. His eyes swept the camp, taking in his wounded and dead, his terrified men, the darkness full of unseen enemies. "All right," he shouted. "All right, Boone, you win. We're throwing down our weapons." Do it slow, Elias commanded. Any sudden moves and my men open fire. Understand? One by one, Rhett's men dropped their guns. Pike's hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped his revolver before setting it down. Sutton, still bleeding from the arrow in his leg, tossed his weapon aside with a groan. Rhett was the last. He held his revolver for a long moment, his knuckles white around the grip, and Marin saw murder in his eyes. Then, with visible effort, he crouched and placed it on the ground. Smart choice, Elias said, then louder. Marin, are you hurt? I'm here. She struggled to her feet, her bound hands making it difficult. I'm all right. Movement in the rocks above, and then figures were descending into the camp. Elias came first, his rifle trained on Rhett, his face hard as granite. Behind him came Calls the Storm, bow still in hand, moving with silent grace. Then Tom Henderson and his two oldest sons, Harold Weeks, surprisingly enough, and three other ranchers Marin recognized from Black Hollow. Not 20 men, but more than enough. Elias crossed to Marin in 3 long strides and pulled a knife from his belt, cutting through the ropes on her wrists. The moment her hands were free, she threw her arms around him, and he held her so tight she could barely breathe. I thought I'd lost you, he said roughly against her hair. When I got home and found Ivy alone and you gone, is she all right? Elias, tell me she's all right. She's fine. Mrs. Henderson has her. She's safe. He pulled back to look at her face, his hands cupping her cheeks. Are you hurt? Did they... No, I'm fine. Just exhausted. She touched his face, needing to feel that he was real, that this wasn't some desperate dream. How did you find me? Calls the Storm brought me your message. We tracked them through the day, waiting for dark to make our move. His gray eyes were fierce. Did you really think I'd let anyone take you from me? Before she could answer, Rhett's voice cut through the moment like a knife. How touching. The rancher and his fat bride reunited at last. Elias went very still. Then he released Marin and turned to face Rhett with a look that promised violence. Get on your knees. What? On your knees. Now. When Rhett didn't move, Elias raised his rifle. You threatened my wife. You invaded my home. You terrified my daughter. The only reason you're still breathing is because I want you to face a judge for it. But if you say one more word about my wife, one more word, I'll shoot you right here and claim self-defense. No one here will contradict me. The other ranchers murmured agreement. Tom Henderson spat on the ground near Rhett's feet. Rhett's face went red, but he lowered himself to his knees. The fight had gone out of him. He'd gambled everything on this play and lost. Tom, Harold, tie them up, Elias ordered. We're taking them back to Black Hollow for the territorial marshal. Calls the Storm, check on the wounded. Anyone who can't ride gets left here for now. We'll send help back for them. As the men moved to follow his orders, Elias turned back to Marin. Can you ride? It's 3 hours back to town. I can ride. She'd crawl over broken glass if it meant getting away from this place. Here. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled like him, leather and wood smoke and home. Stay close to me. They bound Rhett and his surviving men and got them mounted on horses with their hands tied to the saddle horns. The 2 dead guards they wrapped in blankets to bring back for burial. Sutton, his leg roughly bandaged by Calls the Storm, could barely sit his horse, but no one was inclined to show him mercy. As they prepared to ride out, Rhett twisted in his saddle to look at Marin one last time. This isn't over, he said quietly. I have friends, connections. I'll get out eventually. And when I do... When you do, Elias interrupted, positioning his horse between Rhett and Marin, you'll have a choice. You can come after my family again, or you can disappear and never let me see your face. Because if I ever see you again, Mercer, I won't bother with marshals or judges. I'll just kill you. That's a promise. The absolute certainty in his voice made Rhett go pale. He'd seen men like Elias before, men who didn't make idle threats, men who followed through. Move out, Elias commanded, and the group began the long ride back to civilization. Marin rode beside Elias, her body aching and exhausted, but her spirit lighter than it had been in days. Every mile that passed was a mile closer to Ivy, to their ranch, to the life she'd fought so hard to keep. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached Black Hollow. The town was just stirring, smoke rising from morning fires. But word of their approach spread quickly, and by the time they reached the main street, People were pouring out of buildings to watch. The territorial marshal was waiting outside his office, a tall man with steel gray hair and a weathered face. Marshal Hendricks had served in the territory for 20 years and had seen everything the frontier could throw at him. He took in the bound prisoners and the exhausted riders with a single assessing glance. "Elias," he said by way of greeting, "I hear you've had some excitement." "These men kidnapped my wife, Marshal, threatened my family. I want them charged and tried." Hendricks nodded slowly. "I'll need statements from everyone involved. Mrs. Boone, you up for giving your account?" "Yes, sir." Marin's voice was steady despite her exhaustion. "Good. Let's get these men locked up first, then we'll sort out the details." He gestured to his deputy, a young man who immediately began helping Rhett and his men dismount. "Boone, take your wife home. Come back this afternoon and we'll go through everything proper." "Thank you, Marshal." As they turned to leave, Mrs. Pritchard appeared in the crowd, her face pale. "Mrs. Boone," she said, and for once there was no mockery in her voice. I need to apologize. I told that man about your ranch, about where you lived. If I'd known what he intended—" "You didn't know," Marin said tiredly, "and it's done now. Still, I'm sorry, truly." Mrs. Pritchard twisted her hands together. "You were right to leave town when you did. I should have kept my mouth shut." It wasn't much of an apology, but it was more than Marin had expected. She nodded acceptance, too exhausted to feel anger anymore. Elias guided her to where the Hendersons' wagon waited. Tom Henderson smiled at them from the driver's seat. "Thought you might need a ride home. Mary's at my place with Ivy, keeping her company. Mrs. Henderson's been baking all morning to keep busy." "Thank you, Tom, for everything." Elias helped Marin into the wagon, then climbed up beside her. The ride to the Henderson ranch took another hour, but Marin barely felt it. She leaned against Elias, his arm around her shoulders, and let herself simply exist in the moment. Safe, alive, going home. The Henderson ranch appeared over a rise, smaller than the Boone spread but well-maintained and welcoming. And there, on the porch, was Ivy. The little girl saw the wagon and screamed, "Mama! Papa!" She flew down the porch steps before Mrs. Henderson could stop her, running so fast she nearly tripped. Elias pulled the wagon to a halt, and Marin jumped down just in time to catch Ivy as she launched herself into her arms. "Mama! Mama! You came back! You came back!" Ivy was sobbing and laughing at the same time, her small arms wrapped around Marin's neck with bruising force. I thought... "I know, sweetheart, I know." Marin held her daughter, because that's what Ivy was now, truly and completely, and let her own tears fall. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I had to leave you." "But you came back. You promised you'd come back, and you did." Ivy pulled back to look at Marin's face, her own streaked with tears. "I was so brave, just like you said. I stayed in the room and I told Papa everything, just like you told me to. You were so brave. The bravest girl in the whole territory." Marin kissed her forehead, her cheeks, breathing in the scent of her. "I'm so proud of you." Elias knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around both of them. For a long moment, the three of them simply held each other, a family reunited, while the Hendersons watched from the porch with satisfied smiles. Finally, Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. "I've got breakfast ready if you're hungry, and Mary's been dying to see Ivy." They went inside, and Marin found herself surrounded by warmth and kindness. Mrs. Henderson pressed food into her hands and wouldn't take no for an answer. Tom poured coffee for Elias and clasped his shoulder with quiet understanding. The children chattered excitedly, and slowly, the tension began to drain from Marin's body. After breakfast, as Ivy showed Mary the flower crown Marin had taught her to make weeks ago, Mrs. Henderson pulled Marin aside. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "that the whole territory was looking for you. When word got out what happened, folks came together like I've never seen. The women prepared supplies. The men organized search parties. Even people who'd been cruel to you before were asking how they could help." "Why?" Marin asked. "Most of them barely tolerate me." "Because you're one of us. And because what Elias said in town made them realize they'd been treating you poorly without cause." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "He gave quite a speech in the saloon about how you'd brought life back to his ranch, how you'd saved his daughter from grief, how you were the strongest woman he'd ever known. By the time he was done, half the men were ready to ride out that very hour. Marin's throat tightened. He said all that? And more. He loves you, dear. Anyone with eyes can see it, and now the whole town knows it too. When they finally headed home late that afternoon, Ivy sat between them in the wagon, holding both their hands. The summer sun was warm on their faces, and the mountains stood eternal and unchanging against the horizon. As the Boone Ranch came into view, Marin felt something in her chest expand with relief and joy. The house looked exactly as she'd left it, solid, weathered, home. The garden was a bit overgrown from 2 days of neglect, but it was still there, still growing. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and turned to look at her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Boone." The way he said it, with such warmth, such certainty, made her eyes sting with fresh tears. "It's good to be home, Mr. Boone." Ivy jumped down from the wagon and ran to check on her chickens, calling back that she'd collect eggs for dinner. Elias helped Marin down, his hands lingering on her waist. "I meant what I told Mercer," he said quietly. "If he ever comes near you again, I'll kill him, judge or no judge, law or no law." "He won't come back. You broke him today." I saw it in his eyes. "Good." Elias's arms came around her. "Because I can't lose you, Marin. These past 2 days, thinking you might be gone forever, it nearly destroyed me. I realized something. Emma was my first love, and I'll always carry her memory. But you're my second chance, my new beginning. I don't want to survive anymore. I want to live with you for however long we have." Marin reached up and cupped his face. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll live. We'll build a life together. And we'll teach Ivy that love isn't something you lose once and never find again. It's something that can surprise you when you least expect it." He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Ivy was standing nearby with a basket of eggs, grinning. "Are you two going to kiss all the time now?" she asked. "Because Mary's parents do that, and she says it's gross, but I think it's nice." "Probably," Elias said, ruffling his daughter's hair. "You'll just have to get used to it." "Good." Ivy marched past them into the house. "I'm making dinner tonight. Marin taught me how to make cornbread, and I'm going to do it all by myself." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "Probably," Marin said, laughing. "But we'll supervise. Come on." They went inside together, and as Marin stood in her kitchen watching Elias help Ivy measure flour while the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, she felt something she'd almost given up on ever feeling. Peace. The weeks that followed were a blur of normalcy that felt miraculous in its simplicity. Marshal Hendricks came to take Marin's full statement, and she told him everything about her father's debts, Claire's disappearance, Rhett's threats. The marshal listened carefully, taking notes, his face growing grimmer with each detail. "Mercer's wanted in 3 territories for extortion and human trafficking," he said when she finished. "You're not the first woman he's tried to sell. You're just the first who got away and lived to testify about it. Your statement's going to put him away for a long time, Mrs. Boone." The trial was held in late summer. Marin had to face Rhett one more time, sitting in the witness stand in the Black Hollow Church that doubled as a courthouse, and tell her story to a judge who'd traveled from Helena. She kept her eyes on Elias the whole time, drawing strength from his steady presence. Rhett was found guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 15 years of hard labor in the territorial prison. As the marshals led him away in chains, he looked at Marin one last time. "You think you've won," he said, "but you'll never be free of what I made you. You'll always be the woman who ran, the coward, the—" "No," Marin interrupted quietly. "I'm the woman who survived, the woman who fought back, the woman who built a life worth living despite everything you tried to do to me, and that's something you'll never understand." Rhett had no response to that. The marshals dragged him away and Marin never saw him again. After the trial, something shifted in Black Hollow. The women who'd once whispered and mocked began nodding respectfully when they passed Marin in the street. Mrs. Pritchard even invited her to join the church quilting circle, though Marin politely declined, saying she was too busy with the ranch. "You don't have to be kind to them," Elias said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Not after how they treated you." "I know, but holding grudges is exhausting, and I'm tired of being tired." She leaned against his shoulder. "Besides, Mrs. Henderson invited me to a different quilting circle, one with the ranch wives who actually know how to work. That's more my speed anyway. He chuckled and kissed the top of her head. That it is. As autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Marin found a rhythm to ranch life that felt natural and right. She worked in the garden, preserving food for winter. She taught Ivy to read more complex books and helped her with arithmetic. She learned to ride properly, spending mornings with Elias checking fence lines and moving cattle. Her body grew stronger, more capable, and she stopped caring what she looked like and started appreciating what she could do. One October morning, as the first snow was threatening in the high peaks, Marin stood in the bedroom she now shared with Elias and pulled out her mother's wedding dress one final time. She looked at it, yellowed, strained, tied to so much pain and loss, and made a decision. She brought it downstairs where Elias was repairing a bridle at the kitchen table. "I want to remake this," she said. "The dress. I want to take it apart and make something new from it, something that represents who I am now, not who I was running from." Elias looked up from his work. "What would you make?" "I don't know yet. Maybe a quilt, or curtains for our bedroom, or maybe a dress that actually fits me, one I could wear to church or special occasions. Something that's mine. Not my mother's memory, not my promise to Clara, just mine." "I think that's a fine idea." He stood and crossed to her, taking the dress from her hands and setting it aside. "But first I have something for you." He disappeared into his office and came back carrying a small wooden box. Inside was a ring, not the one he'd given her at their first wedding, but a new one. Gold, with a small green stone set in the center. "That's an emerald," he said. "Ordered it from a jeweler in Helena. Green, because that's what I think of when I think of you. Your garden, new growth, life returning after winter." Marin's vision blurred with tears. "Elias, I want to marry you again," he said. "Really marry you. Not because I need a housekeeper or you need safety, but because I love you, because I choose you, because I want everyone to know that you're mine and I'm yours for however long we both live." "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. This one actually fit, and kissed her while autumn wind rattled the windows and the smell of fresh bread filled the house. They married for the second time in December, on the shortest day of the year, in a ceremony held in the Boone Ranch house. The pastor came from Black Hollow, and the Hendersons were there, along with Calls the Storm and his sister Sarah Whitecloud, and Harold Weeks, and several other ranchers who'd helped in the rescue. Marin wore a dress she'd sewn herself from new fabric, deep green, fitted to her body, made with care and pride. Ivy stood as her attendant, wearing a blue dress and a crown of dried flowers. And Elias, dressed in his Sunday best, looked at Marin like she was the only person in the world. "I, Elias Boone, take you, Marin Holloway Boone, to be my wife," he said, his voice steady and sure. "Not because I need you, but because I love you. I choose you. Today, tomorrow, and every day after." "I, Marin Holloway Boone, take you, Elias, to be my husband," she said, tears streaming down her face but her smile radiant. "I choose you. I choose this life. I choose love over fear, hope over running, and family over everything." When they kissed, the room erupted in applause. Ivy cheered loudest of all. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Mrs. Henderson had brought food, Harold Weeks contributed whiskey. Someone played a fiddle, and people danced in the parlor, pushing back furniture to make room. Marin danced with Elias, with Tom Henderson, even with Harold Weeks, who was surprisingly light on his feet after a few drinks. As evening fell and guests began departing, Ivy tugged on Marin's dress. "Mama, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Do you ever miss your sister, Clara?" Marin knelt down to Ivy's level. "Every day. I think about her every day." "Do you think she's still alive somewhere?" "I don't know." It was the honest answer. "Part of me hopes she is, that she found a safe place like I did. But even if she didn't, even if she's gone, I know she'd be happy I found you and your papa. She'd want me to be happy." Ivy hugged her tight. "I hope she's alive too, and I hope someday she finds her way here so she can meet us. Because we're a family now, and families are supposed to be together." "Yes, they are." Marin held her daughter and looked over at Elias, who was talking with the last few guests but watching them with soft eyes. "Yes, they are." That night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Marin stood on the porch with Elias, watching snow begin to fall. It drifted down in soft, silent flakes, covering the ranch in white. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked, his arm around her shoulders. "That I'm happy. Really, truly happy. For the first time in years, I'm not running, not hiding, not afraid of what comes next." She turned to look at him. "You gave me that. You and Ivy. You gave me a home. You gave us a home too," he said. "This place was a tomb before you arrived, full of ghosts and grief. You brought it back to life." They stood together in the falling snow, and Marin thought about the journey that had brought her here. The years of running, the fear and pain and loss. Clara, lost in the mountains, her father's debts, Rhett's threats. All of it had led to this moment, to this porch, to this man. Sometimes the hardest paths led to the most beautiful destinations. "Come inside," Elias said eventually. "It's cold." One more minute. She wanted to remember this, the snow, the silence, the peace. "I want to remember how this feels." "We'll have thousands of moments like this," he promised. "Winters and summers, good years and hard years. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." "Together," she agreed. They went inside, shutting the door on the cold and the dark. In the morning, there would be work to do, animals to feed, fires to build, a life to maintain. But for now, there was just warmth and light and family. Ivy was already asleep upstairs, her room decorated with the things she loved. Pressed flowers from the garden, a drawing of horses, a rag doll Marin had sewn for her. Elias checked on her as he did every night, pulling her blanket up and kissing her forehead. Then he and Marin went to their own room, not his or hers, but theirs, and closed the door. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white silence. The mountains stood guard, as they always had and always would. And in the house at their base, a family slept, imperfect, cobbled together from loss and chance, but real and whole and complete. Marin's last thought before sleep took her was of the wedding dress she'd remade into curtains that now hung in their bedroom window, fabric that had represented promises made to the dead, now repurposed into something practical and beautiful for the living. That was what survival looked like, she thought. Not running forever, not hiding from the past, but taking what you'd been given, even the painful parts, and transforming it into something new, something worth keeping. She'd been the woman everyone mocked, the fat bride in the too-tight dress, but she'd become so much more. She'd become the woman who fought back, who protected her family, who turned a house of grief into a home of laughter, who taught a little girl that love could surprise you when you least expected it, who showed a frozen man that it was possible to live again after loss. She'd become Marin Boone, wife, mother, survivor, fighter, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Years later, when Ivy was grown and had children of her own, she would tell them about her mama Marin, about the woman who came to the ranch when Ivy was 7 years old and changed everything, who taught her about healing plants and reading stars and being brave even when you were terrified. She would tell them about the winter wedding where her parents married for love, not necessity, about the green dress and the emerald ring and the way her father looked at her mother like she hung the moon. She would tell them that family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about choice, about people who chose to love you and stay with you and fight for you even when the world said you weren't worth it. And her children would listen, wide-eyed, and ask if the story was true. Every word, Ivy would say, every single word. Because some stories weren't about princes and princesses and castles. Some stories were about ordinary people in hard places who chose love over fear and hope over despair, who built families from broken pieces and made homes in the wilderness. Those were the best stories of all. And the Boone family lived theirs with courage, with grace, and with love that lasted through all the seasons of their lives. Through harsh winters and golden summers, through trials and triumphs, through everything the frontier could throw at them. They endured. They thrived. They loved. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered. You're almost out of usage resets at 4 a.m.